Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today, a real superstar in the area of aging and gerosciences, looking to create a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Nir Barzilai, Director of the Institute for Aging Research, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biology of Human Aging Research, and of the NIH Nathan Schock Center of Excellence in Basic Biology of Aging. He is also the Ingeborg and Ira Leon Rennett Chair of Aging Research, Professor of the Department of Medicine and Genetics, and member of the Diabetes Research Center and Divisions of Endocrinology and Diabetes and Geriatrics. And Dr. Barzilai's research interests are in the biology and genetics of aging, with one focus of his team on the genetics of exceptional longevity, where they ultimately hypothesize and demonstrate that centenarians, people that defined as 100 and above, and the sort of the subgroup of super centenarians over 110, may have these novel protective genes which allow for the delaying of aging or the protection against age-related diseases. The second component of his work, which Dr. Barzilai holds an NIH Merit Award, is on the study of the metabolic decline that occurs during aging, and his team works in the area of studying the brain and some really interesting neuro-endocrine connections. Dr. Barzilai is also extremely well known for leading the international effort to ultimately approve drugs that can target aging, ultimately defined as gerotherapeutics, with the TAME study, or targeting aging with metformin, as a specific model case that can prove that a specific drug can target a basket of diseases or multi-morbidities simultaneously. Dr. Barzilai is extensively published, extensively awarded. We will put the long bio in the bio of the show. You can pick up his book from 2019, Age Later, on all outlets. But we have a lot of interesting themes to go into with him today. So that being said, Dr. Nir Barzilai, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
I think you covered everything, and I don't know. We should stop here.
Well,
I would say two things. First of all, my CV is only because I've been around, right? I mean, if people are listening and they're younger, you'll get there. It's just counting the time. and you know that I'm 100 years old, so you know that helps.
And
The second thing is contradictory to kind of contradictory to what you gave me a lot of titles, but there are new things that I'm doing in the last few years. This is already an old CV what you had. Because and I'm saying it for a reason. There's a wave, okay? There's a wave, and we hope that this wave is just going to bring us to the promised shores, okay? But I'm the scientific director of the American Federation of Aging Research. I'm an executive on the Longevity Biotech Association, because there's $40 billion investment in longevity biotech now.
Mhm.
I'm also one of the founders of a new medical society that is called the Healthy Longevity Medical Society, to train already doctors. We don't have that many tools, but to train doctors so that we can start maximizing health of people, before it's too late. And I'm also one of the founders of the Academy for Health and Lifespan, where all the top scientists in our field are gathering together. I'm actually on the way there. We're having a meeting this week in the West Coast. So it's all to tell you, boy, it's so exciting what's going on there. We went from hope, it's something we can do about aging, to promise, and now we are trying to realize the promise as soon as possible, before I'm 100 years old.
Outstanding, outstanding. Yeah, no, you definitely, you definitely get the award for the most titles as part of that extended bio. But we will include all of that in the updated bio to the show. So for all our listeners and viewers. But one place I would just love to start off. I know I promised you beforehand that we would touch on a lot of new things, and we will. But if you could just talk for a couple of minutes at the beginning here. I know I've watched a lot of shows that you've done and interviews you've given, and sometimes you talk about your grandfather and sort of I think he was 67 years old or so in this story, where you had your first aha moment that what we're going to be talking about is really what you wanted to do. Take us back a little bit to that time when you're hanging out with your grandfather and realized, I want to do something about aging.
Yeah, people look at their children and say, boy, their imagination is amazing. But when our children look at their grandparents, they don't see themselves being like that, right? They're saying, what happened to them? Where are they coming from? Where they landed? When did they land? Right? We really don't appreciate that this process of aging is something that we actually have started, even if we're young and in our teens. And I think once I had this aha moment of my grandfather telling me what he has done, and I'm looking at him. He was old, obese, gray. He was mainly bald, but gray. Walked really slowly. And I said, just a minute, that's not, what he's telling me. Well, what's happening here? And so it was always the biology of aging. I was a medic, and I was a nurse, and I was a doctor. And it's always like, okay, I'm a diabetologist. Okay, I can look at people in a big hall, and I wouldn't know who has diabetes, okay? But if you ask me who's above 50 and below 50, yeah, I'll know. This is the biggest problem. And then we discovered that actually all those diseases that we accumulated, diabetes and cancer and Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease, that it's the biology of aging that drives those diseases. And the realization that if we target the biology of aging, we prevent not one disease like statins with heart, and not two diseases, but a lot of the diseases of aging. And that's what we're trying. That's the new history we're trying to create.
Excellent. And with it, that, I mean, you're extremely well known. You're well known for a lot of stuff. But one of the things, obviously, is your work with the Centenarians and sort of the subgroup of the super Centenarians that I mentioned in the bio. I went and I checked out the United Nations Population Fund data, and I was really surprised that I think it was maybe a year ago that we had something close to 500,000 on the planet nowadays, which was, I didn't know. I mean, obviously a part of 8 billion, it's not a lot, but still quite a few. Say a few words of sort of what it's been like from the beginning of sort of working with this very unique population. And we'll get into sort of the genetics and a lot of what you're finding out in the peer-reviewed literature, but any interesting factoids about this group for the show, in the sense that you were just saying I can point out something that's old, and I can also point out, in my family, I got 70-year-old, 80-year-old, 90-year-olds, and I know there's some heart disease and cancer and dementia here. And what happens at 102 and 107 and 111? Is there a difference between a 102-year-old and a 112-year-old? Take us a little to some of the things you've been discovering, just from a physiological perspective.
Well, let me tell you the most important thing to know, which wasn't. It took us a while to get to it, but always the question was: are the Centenarians, did they get sick when everybody gets sick? Sure. The majority of us get some disease after the age of 60. Between 60 and 70, we already have one disease. And by the way, after the age of 60, we accumulate. Okay, we accumulated diseases, we accumulate treatments for those diseases, the interaction of drugs. It's a real mess. And so the question, are centenarians sick like everybody, and now all they do is live sick for more? Or are they example of what we're trying to achieve, of people who are not only living longer, but living healthier? And we published this paper that took data from our study and from the New England Centenarian studies, and we showed that and we harmonized the data, but we showed separately the same data that shows that everybody's healthy in the beginning, and people who are not going to be centenarians are starting to accumulate their diseases at age 60, but centenarians live 20 to 30 years more healthy. Okay. By the way, we're comparing them to people they're 100 years old to people who are in their 60s now. Okay. That's what we're comparing them. It's really not fair, because we had to compare them to their friends, right? To their cohort who died already, 20 years before our cohort. So we are underestimating. So this is example of people who live longer and live healthier. But you know what? That's not the major thing. The major thing is that they have what we call a contraction of morbidity. They're sick very little time at the end of their lives. 30% of them don't have any disease, okay? And many of them will just not wake up in the morning. And this is really what we're trying to do, to live healthy, and to die. And there's a huge longevity dividend for that. We can talk about it later. But I think this is the most important thing that we should know. We have example that our lifespan as a species is like 115 years, our maximal lifespan. Okay, there are people who pass that, but statistically, and we die now in the United States before the age of 76. So we have 35 years to realize, and yes, we can realize them because it's possible. We know that.
You have the longevity genes project going on, and you're studying, a lot more than genes, collecting blood and so forth. Talk a little bit, because I know, you've published extensively on sort of the endocrine and the neuroendocrine component of this, the leptin and the IGF-1 and so forth. There's papers in there on sort of the inflammatory biomarker profile of these folks. There's NF-kappa beta that shows up a lot. And then there's, as you've mentioned on some of your past interviews, there's some of the weird stuff too, like the APO genes that now they're expressed, and we should have some dementia here, but we don't. Talk a little bit about the genetics here. What are some of the surprises? What are some of the things that obviously, that fit with your knowledge as a diabetologist from all these years? Take us through a little bit of what you're finding out in terms of some of these genetic profiles.
Well, let's start with the most important thing. The most important thing is that 60% of our centenarians have genetic changes or mutation that makes their growth hormone action inactive. Okay. Now, I'm saying growth hormone. There's only one growth hormone, but there are many growth hormones. Okay. So when I say growth hormone, I say it loosely in the context of talking to lay people. Okay. So there are many growth hormones, and there are receptors to those growth hormones, and there's other things, but we have 60% of our centenarians have something that blocks the action of growth hormone. Now, is that weird? Well, first of all, we know from nature that the small live longer. The small dogs live much longer than the large dogs. The ponies live more than the thoroughbreds. When we do things in the lab in variety of animal and knock out their growth hormone, then if we knock them out, they live longer and healthier. And if we express more growth hormone, they die sooner. So in nature, we all have an agreement, and I have to tell you, I wrote many grants with hypotheses. Mainly, my hypotheses were wrong, but we discovered the truth, okay? This is a grant that I wrote thinking that this is a total bullshit, and it actually happened to be, because I thought, because the evidence from human, I understand why, but the evidence of human was, in some papers growth hormone is great, in some paper growth hormones are bad, and the reason is very simple. Growth hormone is good for you when you're young. Okay, when you're young, and I'm saying like up to the age of 50, okay, you want to have a growth hormone. If you have higher growth hormone, you're protected from variety of diseases and mortality. So it's really good. It totally flips when you're over the age of 50. All of a sudden, this growth, the higher growth hormone you have, is bad for you. And I think we can understand it intuitively because we need growth for basically reproduction. Right. But then we age, we start breaking down. There's no reason why would we invest in growth when we have to invest in protecting us against aging. And we actually proved it in a quite a recent paper using a big data set from the UK Biobank to show really this flip. It's called antagonistic pleiotromy. Things that are good for you when you're young can turn against you when you're old. Yep. So I think that's really a major discovery, very important for us if we want to get to age 100.
And I see, a lot of these genetic discoveries, these targets, they fit perfectly, from the longevity genes into sort of the gerotherapeutic equation, what we can target. And we'll get to TAME in a bit, but I just, one of the, you had a lot of fascinating papers, but one of the one that was quite interesting was the September 2020 paper in Aging Cell. It was entitled "The Plasma Proteomic Profile of Frailty." And here you measure thousands of proteins in the plasma, and you almost like these interesting waves of proteins that are doing all sorts of other stuff in terms of impacting cell signaling and musculoskeletal development and any, I once again thinking of sort of, okay, we can target the genes and so forth with therapeutics, but we come to sort of these plasma profiles, thinking about sort of the history of parabiosis and all that other stuff that's going on. Any other interesting findings, the things that get you excited when we talk about sort of the broader sort of, I'll call it the soup of what's flowing through some of these supercentenarians?
Yeah, right. So let me back up a bit and say that we have a chronological age, it's in our passport, and we have a biological age.
Right.
And, maybe we don't see it initially in our age group, unless you get to the 40-50 reunion. but you can see it in your parents or grandparents. If you're younger, you can see that not everybody age at the same rate. And people, you ask people their age and you're surprised how young they look or how old they look. Okay. And we are trying to understand what we see in a more biological way. And we're trying to measure what we call biomarkers. By the way, the biomarkers, I like the biomarkers that come from blood, okay? But there are biomarkers that comes from tissue that we cannot use clinically. And there are biomarkers like, taking picture of your face and suggesting how old you are by the face, or your skin age, or other things. There's lots of biomarkers that you can where you can do things. But we're trying not only to find in a blood test how old are you now, biologically, but we also are trying to find biomarkers that will change when we do intervention. And this is a bigger role, because we don't think that every biomarker will change, or even more important, will not change soon enough for us to know a progress. I told you, I'm part of the Longevity Biotech Association, and when you develop a drug, you want in a phase 2 trial that lasts few months to see evidence that you're targeting aging, so that you can go to phase 3 trial. Because otherwise, we're going to have billions of dollars failing in a phase 3 trial. So we need a little bit more. Like if you have something that lowers cholesterol, then it's going to prevent heart attacks, right? That's easy. For aging, the biomarkers are more complex. And what we're doing everywhere now, we're doing, as you mentioned, we measured 5,000 proteins in thousands of people. That's a lot also. Those are, and try to figure out which of the proteins are reflecting aging and which one are going to change in a short-term intervention.
Excellent. And one more piece of that before we move into sort of gerotherapeutic development, but anything interesting pop up with the centenarians and super centenarians related to the microbiome? I mean,
look, there are studies of the microbiome of centenarians. We haven't done that. It's actually hard to obtain.
I can imagine.
We're going to their home, and one of the things we cannot do, or we cannot wait, or we cannot, is establishing. We're trying to think of creative ways to do that. But there are papers around the world that suggest that the microbiome are different in centenarians. Now, this is my problem, and it's kind of back to the first question where you said, how are they 100 years old? How are they 106 years old? The 116 years old. So for me, it's about the trip. It's about the travel. Yeah. It's how they were, not now, when they're at the end of their life. Everyone that I target now at age of 100 has 30% chances of dying in the next year. So suppose I measure something in their plasma. What is it? Is it something that's going to predict their death? Or is it going to predict how did they get there? I'm really trying to stay away from the phenotype of centenarian because I really wanted to know how they were 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago, to see when they were healthy, how they were, when they're not at the end of their lives. When at the end of their lives, their genes are the same genes, but their phenotype, what we call, is already failing. Sure. Okay, so for me, it's getting there. It's not how they are at the end of their life. And because of that, whatever you measure at centenarians, without measuring it in their offspring, is meaningless for me. Okay, the way I compare, because I don't have longitudinal data on centenarians, I have their offspring. And we're looking at their offspring in a longitudinal way. And then we'll see what's important as they get. By the way, the offspring of centenarians are, basically 10 years younger than people, their age, their chronological age. Okay, so we are trying to, we are trying to figure out the journey, rather at what happened to them in their last way of life. And because of that, I have no idea if this microbiome is end of life, is it protective, or what. I really cannot comment on that much.
I thought I'd mention it, but no, I completely understand that there's a lot more on the drawing table. So no, I appreciate that nonetheless. So yeah, let's transfer a bit into the world of gerotherapeutic development. We'll talk about TAME, but let's say a few things about metformin, because I know that this is obviously an important part of TAME. And just for people that are unaware, that hear the word metformin associated with aging, but if we go back, here is a drug discovered in 1922, clinically studied in 1950, approved for market in 1957 in Europe, approved here in the United States in 1995, the third most commonly prescribed medication around the world. derived from a plant. So it has the nice natural product connection.
Nutraceutical kind of.
Exactly, exactly. And then, it's so fascinating because, I sit here and I think, if you and I were to start a biotech company tomorrow, Barzilai passed their biotech company, and we discovered metformin next week, and we took it to like a drug company to partner with, they would look at us because it's one of those things that drug companies nowadays, this is a dirty substance, right? Because it does everything. It has so many mechanisms, not just in terms of sort of the metabolic stuff. It has no one really talks about sort of the ovarian syndrome stuff. Talk about mechanism of action regarding metformin, specifically the metabolic side that excites you in terms of aging and longevity. I mean, it does, because it does so much, and I think we don't talk about this as much, but I think it's important just as a layperson.
I think it's very important, and that's actually my challenge with scientists, right, and with doctors.
Right.
And I'm not excited about the metabolic part of metformin. So this is the story, and I'm also going back. We agree on those hallmarks of aging.
Right.
What's the hallmark of aging? Something that goes wrong with aging, and if you fix it in animals, they live healthier and longer. Okay, so we have kind of a consensus. What are the hallmarks of aging?
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of a sudden, metformin comes. Oh, and another important thing: you can target one hallmark, and you change the others. In other words, you don't have to target all the hallmarks to get somewhere. Mm-hmm. You target one, you often influence the others. Okay, so you keep this in mind. What we used to fight about the mechanisms of aging on metformin, not as much for diabetes, but what else is it doing?
Right.
And why did we fight about it? Because we didn't realize that it's a gerotherapeutic, okay? A gerotherapeutic like metformin takes our old cell or our old tissue or mm-hmm. our old body and makes it younger. If it makes it younger, it fixes a lot of things. It fixes not one of the hallmarks of aging. In fact, we've showed with metformin, there's evidence that it fixes all the hallmarks of aging. So once you have a drug like that, people who are interested in any of the mechanism of aging says, hey, that's what it's doing, and not the other. Well, they are right. It's doing something else, but it's also doing the other. What is metformin? What is the main reason why metformin makes us young? I don't really know. I kind of guess, but I don't really know. It doesn't matter. It's a gerotherapeutic, which means it fixes one thing, so it fixes a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Same things for another drug that people are talking about, rapamycin. Sure. Okay, rapamycin targets all the hallmarks of aging. Exercise and diet targets all the hallmarks of aging. So we just have to understand we don't have to fight about the mechanism. In fact, if you're telling me like statins, they fix only cholesterol, well, they're not gerotherapeutics, okay? For gerotherapeutics, I need to see some movement in the hallmarks of aging. If it's not gerotherapeutic. Mm-hmm. So if people are asking, is it diabetes? Diabetes diabetes is an age-related disease. It fixes the aging part. It also has a metabolic part. By the way, serendipity, talking about my old age, I was a fellow at Yale University in 1987-88 when they started to bring metformin, preparing metformin for an FDA presentation. The FDA, of course, said, yeah, you have 50 years experience in metformin, but we don't know that it works on American. Okay, maybe it works only on British and French. It's part of the FDA. So you had to do the studies, and my role was to find the mechanism of aging of metformin that's related to diabetes. So I'm like the first to publish paper on that, right. And it's absolutely true and important for diabetes. But then decades later, I discovered that's not the only thing metformin is doing.
Right. No, it's I've always, I've always been on the side that, if there is something that has a sort of the broader spectrum, that it's exciting. I know we're in the era of, highly targeted stuff, but when it has a profile of this nature, that it goes into metabolism, that may have interesting neuroendocrine effects, there's a reason to study it further. So
the bad news, right? The bad news is the drugs that are developed now are very, very, very specific.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we're not going to get, there are other classes of drugs,
right,
that are less, that are less specific, and they have effects on aging. Okay, we published, 9 such drugs, and we're not going to have many of them because they're specific. The outstanding one is a class that's called SGLT2 inhibitors.
Right.
They are specifically designed to block SGLT2, but for another reason, they have major effects on aging, and they prevent variety of age-related diseases.
Let's do an interesting little thought exercise here, because I want to get into that as well. But so I'm going to go now from your business partner in this biotech company. I'm going to be your benefactor here. I have an additional $100 million or so sitting over here. I'm going to fund TAME. Now, there's 3 things that can happen, right?
But by the way, funding TAME is a bad business decision.
I'm a stupid investor. Let's go with that for a minute. So 3 things are going to happen. 1, I fund TAME. We do the study. We come back 6 years from now, and we look at the data, and nothing's happened. I don't think anyone with the right mind on the planet agrees that will happen, so I'm not going to throw that out. The second thing is, we'll come back in 6 years. We open up the data, and it's a blockbuster. It does exactly what you believe it's going to do across endocrine and cardio and neuro and cancer reduction, all that. Nir, what happens the next day? What do we do? Because is it a case that we want to do a Jonas Salk and just hand that data over to the world? Or because, once again, because you're looking for this indication from FDA that says, yes, this is whatever, however they're going to phrase it. This is a gerotherapeutic for the use in gerotherapeutic, or whatever it would say. What do we do the next day? Is the goal to make a branded generic of this metformin and go out there and I have extra money, we can do this, and market the hell out of it for this purpose? Not for marketing, not to make a ton of money, but just to spread awareness. What happens in scenario 2? Where do we go with this?
I think the next day is the most exciting for me, and I'll tell you for some reason. But let me just say, the study that we are doing, okay, the TAME study,
right,
it has a construct of age-related disease that we're going to prevent, okay? Right. Each one of those diseases has been studied on metformin separately, okay, with effect size of 30%. So the studies have been done, okay? It's always now I'm thinking, because of the delay in TAME, I'm thinking, really, you don't have to wait, because you already know there's enough data that shows you that if you take metformin, you delay cancer, you delay cardiovascular disease, you delay diabetes, you did it. Okay, there's data for that enough. Okay, the single purpose of the trial, okay, is to show the FDA that aging can be targeted. This is what we're trying to do. That's why we went to the FDA. If you want to see a beautiful cover of us going to the FDA, it's Ron Howard film, The Age of Aging. It's in National Geographic. This is what we want to do, because first of all, the healthcare providers don't have to give a drug to their clients if the FDA didn't approve that. Okay. Now, with metformin, it's not going to be a problem because it's one of the cheapest. You didn't mention that it's number 3 used, but it's also the cheapest drug in the
Right.
US market.
My fault.
But if healthcare providers don't have, there's no indication to treat aging, pharmaceuticals are waiting for us. Some have jumped in, like Regeneron, but some of them are waiting to see what the FDA is going to do because they understand this is the future, it's lucrative, but they have to have sign that there's a way forward. They need, the pharmaceuticals need a business plan. Okay, so one of the things the next day is programs that are already being thought of are going to be implemented by pharmaceuticals. And not only that, by that time, the biotechs will be ready with enough drugs to test. For the phase 3 trial, they need the pharmaceuticals, right? So, but the most important thing of the next day is that metformin can be repurposed immediately.
Right.
Okay. Who needs metformin? I'll tell you who needs metformin the most. The poor people in the United States. The poor people are in every city in the United States, and in some states more than others. They die 20 years before at least 20 years before the rich people. It depends how rich are the people also. There's a dose response of richness and health. And they need help. They're not the only one. People who survive cancer age rapidly because we gave them chemotherapy and radiation.
Right.
People who have HIV, because of the treatment, get diseases 10 years earlier. People who are disabled, right? And I always say, if we want to go to Mars, not spin on the atmosphere, but go to Mars, we have to solve aging problem first, because we'll get cancer or cardiovascular disease on the way and we'll never come back. So there's lots of reason why we need to solve the aging program. But the next day means that doctors who are conservative will say, well, if the FDA says that that's a safe thing and I have somebody who has an aging problem, go ahead.
You're trailblazing, this path, with FDA to create, sort of an entirely new class, a new type of indication. A few years ago, FDA created a guidance on combination therapies that took into, because obviously combinations, HIV, cancer, and so forth have been used a long time. But the typical model in the past has been, we develop drug A, develop drug B, develop drug C, and then sometime decades later, we combine them. FDA created guidance recently on how you could create combinations earlier on in the process. And I think, as we've been discussing per the hallmarks and so forth, that it's going to take some combination approaches here. You mentioned the SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1 agonists, and so forth out there. It doesn't have to be metabolic, but what is your ideal sort of combination cocktail? Again, I have a couple $100 million here. I keep want to fund. I'm a stupid investor, but I keep want to putting it into you. Where do you go beyond metformin? Maybe no, if we don't have the branded substances, but if you bring rapamycin, if you bring some of these other repurposing possibilities together, is there a sort of a gerotherapeutic cocktail that you have in mind that if you had, all the money falling from the sky, you would love to explore?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'm worried about it because what you're thinking, which is probably a lot of time true, is that if we get few drugs that target longevity, we can get additive effect, even synergistic effects. Okay, we know in mice, if you give them combination of rapamycin and metformin, they're the longest living animals that we have. Okay, so the idea that they're additive is really good. The question, does it hold? Does it hold to any two combination, and does it hold to many more combinations? So I'll give you an example. Metformin, there's this study that showed that if you take elderly people and exercise them, okay, half of them you exercise with metformin, the other half with placebo.
Mm-hmm.
Those that get metformin, everybody who exercise develops more muscle, but with metformin you develop less muscle. So it looks like there's trade-off. It's not additive, right? By the way, we showed that though they develop less muscle, the muscle is in a better quality and they do the same. They achieve the same. But still, if you want your muscles to show up, you shouldn't be on metformin, okay? Mm-hmm. And muscle is important. So there are trade-offs. So that's one example. The other examples has to do with nutraceuticals, okay? And sure. If you read my book, in my book, I talk about, you know, nutraceuticals and supplements and stuff, and I said they're good for the economy, okay? That's all, because we don't know what they are. We don't know how long they've been on the shelf. A lot of the things are very sensitive, are not very, you know, are not holding well with time, and you know, they don't have what they want, and you know, and so who cares? I realized recently that some of the supplements that are being developed are really strong supplements. Yeah. So it's like I cannot say they have nothing anymore. And not only there are strong supplements, we have some data of people who are intensively treating themselves with combination, you know, like people who get 30 different supplements. When you watch at their biological age by lots of clocks, right, it accelerates. Okay. Now I don't know if the clocks are good. Okay. I don't think that we can trust the clocks, but I'm actually worried that if you're doing so many things, we still don't know enough about the interactions and the addition and the synergistic. So I'm not going to okay, saying that, so I'm not going to recommend you. Saying that, there is one really important example. Mars, you know, the candy bar Mars company. Yep. They did a huge study, like 20,000 people, where they gave half of the people flavonoid, you know, chocolate.
Oh yeah.
And half of the people something that tasted as good but had no flavonoid, you know, another powder. Right. And the flavonoid had major effect, cardiovascular effect, mortality, other things. Okay, if you go to the FDA now, they still don't allow you to say on your package, this nutraceutical may increase your life or prevent heart disease. Okay, and one of our fights has to be going to the FDA and says, look, there are lots of nutraceuticals that are important for aging. We know that because we experiment with that. And we have to allow people to do this study so that we can gather data. Otherwise, we'll never know the truth. And so the FDA has to have a way for people who are doing clinical studies to be able to publicize that and give them much more of support than what we have now, because now it's a jungle and I wouldn't recommend anything.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I in a past career I was involved in a company, because the FDA also created in 1996 this botanical drug definition, which sort of merged nutraceutical and drug together, and it was the same problem you just mentioned. You know, when you bring, how do you do pharmacokinetics on a substance that has, you know, 50 bioactive things in it? And that's where, you know, it wasn't that it didn't, you know, these work great. I mean, some of these nutraceuticals are amazing. It's ultimately how you ultimately do the drug development part of it to satisfy that, yeah, okay, you can standardize this and make sure that, you know, pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, and everything else, you understand what's going on. But you know, you bring up some really important points there. I appreciate that as well.
I want to say another point that I should have said before, but we talked about this antagonistic pleiotrope growth hormone. So look, for example, metformin lowers growth hormone, one of the growth hormone, IGF-1. Okay, so it's not good when you take it when you're young. When a 37-year-old bodybuilder comes and say how much metformin to take, I'm like, no, you don't take metformin, because it works the other way. Whatever is good for you for aging might not be good for you when you're young. And I don't want people less than 50, unless they're obese, diabetic, PCSO, unless they have something else, they shouldn't be on metformin in my mind. It's not going to help their aging. It might be antagonistic to them, right? So we have to be careful. There's a lot of things that are out there, and I know that they're 20 years old on metformin. I think that's ridiculous. I have no idea that it's safe.
Nir, at the beginning, when I read your incomplete bio, you mentioned some of the other sort of initiatives that you're involved in terms of Longevity Biotechnology Association, the Longevity Clinical, the Medicine Organization. There's a lot of non-traditional biomedical stuff going on now too, where sort of longevity is peaking in. I mean, I had a couple of months ago, I had an episode with the head of R&D at Special Forces that's doing the clinical side with David Sinclair's NNM stuff. I got an ARPA-H show coming up. A lot of organizations within the ARPA model that are looking at biology, and they have it's a neat model in the sense that it's not the old school way of doing things, but they really take on frontier. Let's pour as much money into something and see how we can go with it, as opposed to waiting around for 9 months for a grant. Which of these moonshots? Talk a little bit about some of, to the extent that we're not getting anything confidential, but what excites you in terms of some of these moonshots, some of these non-traditional bio research programs that we have going on in 2023? Talk a little bit about this part of the space.
So for me, aging for the geroscientist has three parts. One, I call it the Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray stopped aging. When he wanted to see how he looks like for his chronological age, he had to look at the mirror, right? I'm doing it right now. I'm looking at the Zoom. I'm saying, no, that's not me. I'm much younger.
Me too.
That's Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is metformin, okay, is rapamycin. Let's target aging. Let's start slowing aging. That's one pocket. The second pocket is what I call the Wolverine, or the fountain of youth. How do we take an old person and make it young? It's harder in my mind than the third thing that I'll get to, but we can do it, first of all, by senolytics. Okay, at least in animals, so we don't have that much of a proof of concept in humans, but at least in animals, we can make them better. We don't elongate their life. We don't increase their maximal lifespan at all, but we make them, instead of getting sick, they're healthy for longer. Okay, and I think they're going to be important. It's a concept that is actually hard in the translation part, because the senescent cells vary across tissue, they change around time, and but it not hard to figure out eventually. The second part of this Wolverine is regeneration of tissues. We can form liver cells. We can form, in other words, replacements of cells in failing organs. So instead of one organ have us rate limiting, so we have to die because we have a kidney failure or liver failure, let's do replacement and get a boost to the rest of the body. The third thing is really, for me, the moonshot one, which is the Peter Pan scenario. Peter Pan doesn't grow old, okay? The idea that in the future, and for me, this future is 50 years from now, so I'm not going to benefit it, because we're talking about 20 years old, 20-year-old people or 18-year-old people that are going to get some treatment every few months or every year to erase their aging, right? Epigenetically, or, whatever, whatever we're doing, stem cells, whatever we're doing. I think this will be the easiest thing. I think the easiest thing is to prevent aging rather than to reverse aging. But all of those are important, and we have to do them in parallel. My problem with moonshots is that, look, we went to the moon. So what? What happened that we went to the moon? Did you benefit from it? Do we have colonies there? The moonshot, I mean, yeah, computer was developed, people will tell you that this technology was very important, and I agree. But the moonshot itself, we got to the moon, we saw a man in the moon, thank you, that was in 1969, never happened again, so what? And that's a problem. The problem is that moonshots have to be relevant to human health, and moonshots have very long time scales. I'm having such a hard time to impact human health right now with metformin because the resources go to moonshot. That makes no sense to me. Okay, so I'm in favor of developing of everyone, but hey, the Dorian Gray scenario is something that we can start doing right now in the next several years. So let's say that this is a moonshot for us.
Absolutely. Agree 100%. One last thing, I was listening to an interview you did a couple weeks ago, and for the first time I heard you mention, I think you were talking to Gordon Lithgow, actually. You were talking about back in the 1980s, you were in, I think, South Africa, and you were involved in building something called a nutritional village. And I thought it was a fascinating, part of the story that we don't hear about you that often. And then it got me thinking, because a couple of weeks ago, you published a paper in the Lancet Healthy Longevity. It's on something you're involved in also now. I didn't mention, called the Quantum Healthy Longevity Program, which is involved in something called looking at the exposome. And it's sort of defined in this paper as sort of the complex exposures humans face, including the food we ingest, the air we breathe, everything we touch, psychological stresses, and so forth. And it got me thinking back to your nutritional village thing and sort of this topic of blue zones. And we had the ambassador on from Costa Rica. They got a blue zone down there. He's also a medical doctor as well. Say a couple words about the Quantum Healthy Longevity Project and sort of this principle of, obviously we need to think about the drugs and the metformins and all that stuff, but there is an all-encompassing picture here of everything else that is not good for us. And, I just want to connect back to something early in your career.
Absolutely true. And you talked about some of the exposomes. I think what individuals have to know that there are 4 things that if they do, they're likely to pass age 80 in good health, okay? The first is exercise. The second is dieting. Now, saying dieting is not enough, so I can elaborate later. Third is sleep. And also sleep, you can decide, I want to sleep 8 hours. It's not going to happen, right? But how can you sleep as much as possible? And the last thing is connectivity, is is mood, is connections, is family, is whatever can make you happy beside everything. Those are the major things. And there are others, okay, such as not having pollution, right? Okay, so, but I think it's very important that all those things that I mentioned, the 4 things, have biological connectivity. Even the last one, okay? I'll give the example of a stressful mother. That's from Blackburn, who got a Nobel Prize for her telomere studies. They measured telomeres in the blood of mothers whose children were in the hospital, and they repeated that after their children were back home, and the telomeres got longer. Okay, so I'm saying even psychological stress, or now I'm talking more about loneliness, but never mind, psychological stress has biological rooting.
Oh, yeah.
Sleep deprivation is very bad biologically because there are lots of things that happen. You become insulin resistant, you eat more, exercise has all those benefits on its own. And I can talk, if you want, I can talk what I mean by diet. But
Sure.
yes, the exposome has a biology. It affects the hallmarks of aging.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're biologists, we're just trying to target the biology itself, but the exposome is really important.
Excellent.
The exposome is what we are exposed to, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I wanted to, I said I wanted to come full circle, and just, it struck me as there's so many dimensions to Nir Barzilai, and we hear, and that was the first time I heard about that. Once again, your time in South Africa and this whole nutritional village concept. So I thought it fit in kind of nicely with what some of the things you're doing. It's amazing stuff, Nir. I mean, I'm a big fan. I'm rooting you on. Anything else for 2023 or stuff that's coming up that I missed that you might want to mention? Please, take the floor.
No, I appreciate the questions that you asked. They're really important for me. It's all practical. Is how do we realize the promise? How do we accelerate it? It's really amazing for me that we know about the promise for more than a decade, and it's not easy to translate it. It's actually very frustrating when it comes to translate, when it's so clear. And what I realized this year is, you have listeners that might hear this topic for the first time, although you dealt with this topic before. Mm-hmm. And I think when people hear it the first time, they say, yeah, that's interesting. This guy is saying that you could do something about aging. That's right. And okay, but then they need to hear it the second time. And in the second time, they notice more, and they say, oh, and you repeat something that they didn't realize, and there's a new thing, and it's come there. And it really needs the third time to convert people, okay? So I hope that this podcast is not only the first, but maybe a second and third, because we need you guys. This is part of the wave. Yep. For us to talk, for people to listen and understand that we're geroscientists, we're serious bunch of people. We've worked in the lab, we showed many concepts, we moved ahead, light years ahead to really be able to say, hey, we can do something about aging. Not about death, by the way, okay? Our mother said, there's nothing to do about dying, but yeah, we can do something about aging. Mm-hmm. And we have to make it relevant now because time just elapse.
I'm rooting you on, Nir. And it's we'll definitely do a follow-up, and I want to spread the message as much as possible. Again, for everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of the podcast across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Nir Barzilai, Director of the Institute for Aging Research, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Director Paul Glenn Center for Biology of Human Aging Research.
You ran out of time.
And many other things that we'll put in the bio. Nir, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk for a little while about these topics. Obviously, thank you for doing and being involved. And as we say on our show here, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for everybody out there via what you've been doing. It's a really good story.
Thank you for you. You're part of the soldiers who are doing that. Thank you.